Human experiments in the Cold War, behind the Iron Curtain and within the walls of American laboratories, a horror was unfolding that would make the darkest fiction pale in comparison. While the world focused on nuclear missiles and space races, thousands of innocent people were being transformed into human guinea pigs. Soldiers, psychiatric patients, prisoners, even children, all became expendable in the name of national security. What you're about to discover are not conspiracy theories. These are documented facts, declassified files, testimonies from survivors, and confessions from scientists who finally broke their silence. This is the story of how two superpowers abandoned their humanity in pursuit of the ultimate weapon, the human mind itself. The experiments were brutal. The cover-ups were systematic. The victims were forgotten. Until now. Leave a comment below and tell us, do you believe these programs ever truly ended, or are they simply better hidden today? The beginning of madness. The year is 1945. World War II has just ended, but peace is an illusion. The United States and the Soviet Union, former allies, now eye each other with suspicion and fear. The atomic bomb has shown the world what science can do. But there's something both nations want even more than nuclear weapons: control over the human mind. In the ruins of Nazi Germany, American intelligence officers are making deals in the shadows. They're not hunting war criminals. They're recruiting them. Operation Paperclip, a secret program approved at the highest levels of government, brings over 1,600 German scientists to America. Among them are men who conducted unspeakable experiments in concentration camps. Men like Kurt Blom, who tested nerve agents on prisoners. Men like Hubertus Strughold, who subjected inmates to extreme altitude experiments, watching as their lungs collapsed and their eyes hemorrhaged. These scientists don't face justice at Nuremberg. Instead, they receive new identities, comfortable homes, and laboratories where they can continue their work. The only difference now is that they're working for the American government. But the Germans aren't the only ones experimenting. At Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland, the U.S. Army Chemical Corps begins testing chemical weapons on American soldiers. The subjects are told they're participating in research to develop protective gear. They're not told about the mustard gas, the nerve agents, the psychochemical weapons that will be tested on their bodies. Private First Class Tim Josephs volunteers for what he believes is a noble cause. He's led into a chamber and strapped to a chair. Within minutes, a fine mist fills the room. Tim's skin begins to burn. Blisters form across his arms and chest. His lungs feel like they're on fire. He screams for help, but the scientists on the other side of the observation window simply take notes. Tim survives, but he's never the same. His respiratory system is permanently damaged. He develops chronic skin conditions. Decades later, he'll still wake up gasping for air, reliving that moment in the chamber. And Tim is just one of thousands. At the Naval Research Laboratory, sailors are exposed to toxic gases without protection. At the University of Chicago, researchers inject hospital patients with plutonium, telling them it's a new treatment. The patients are poor, mostly African American, people the researchers believe won't be missed. In the Soviet Union, similar horrors are unfolding. In the closed cities of the Urals, where nuclear weapons are being developed, workers are deliberately exposed to radiation to study its effects. Whole villages are contaminated in secret experiments. When people start dying, the government blames industrial accidents. The KGB establishes Laboratory 12, a secret facility dedicated to developing undetectable poisons. Prisoners are used to test these substances. They're given food or drinks laced with toxins, then monitored as they die slow, agonizing deaths. The scientists document every symptom, every convulsion, every moment of suffering. This is just the beginning. The experiments will grow more sophisticated, more invasive, more cruel. Because in the Cold War, both sides are convinced themselves that the ends justify any means. That national security outweighs individual rights. That some lives are worth more than others. The madness has only just begun. What do you think about what you've seen so far? Does this change how you view government authority? Share your thoughts in the comments. Mkultra, the Mind Control Program. April 19, 1953. In a secret meeting at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, a new program receives approval. Its code name is MKUltra. Its mission is to develop techniques for mind control. The man in charge is Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist with clubfoot and a stutter, who will become known as the CIA's poisoner-in-chief. Gottlieb's vision is ambitious and terrifying. He wants to find ways to extract information from enemy agents, to program assassins who won't remember their missions, to create the perfect truth serum. To achieve this, he's given unlimited funds and carte blanche to experiment on unwitting subjects. The drug of choice is LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide. The CIA believes this powerful hallucinogen could be weaponized, used to disorient enemy soldiers or make prisoners talk. But first, they need to understand its effects. And that means testing it on people. Operation Midnight Climax begins in San Francisco. The CIA rents several apartments and turns them into elaborate observation posts. Prostitutes, secretly on the CIA payroll, bring clients to these apartments. Once inside, the men are given drinks spiked with LSD behind two-way mirrors. CIA agents watch and record what happens as the drug takes effect. The men have no idea they're being drugged. Some experience euphoria. Others descend into terrifying hallucinations. Some become violent. At least one dies, though his death is never officially connected to program. But the experiments don't stop at brothels. Mental hospitals become testing grounds. At hospitals in Kentucky and Massachusetts, psychiatric patients are given LSD for days, weeks, even months at a time. Some receive doses far beyond what any human should endure. They're subjected to sensory deprivation, forced to listen to the same recorded messages thousands of times, attempting to erase their existing personalities and implant new ones. Dr. Ewan Cameron, a Scottish psychiatrist working at McGill University in Montreal, takes these techniques to new extremes. Cameron believes he can cure mental illness by wiping the mind clean and rebuilding it from scratch. His patients, many of them suffering from depression or anxiety, are placed in drug-induced comas for weeks. They're subjected to massive electroshock treatments, far beyond therapeutic levels. They're forced to listen to recorded messages played on endless loops. You are a good mother. You are a good wife. When they wake up, many don't know who they are. They can't remember their children, their spouses, their entire lives before treatment. The CIA funds Cameron's work through front organizations, keeping their involvement secret. Then there's Frank Olson, a biochemist working for the CIA. Olson has moral reservations about the chemical weapons program. In November 1953, during a work retreat, his colleagues slip LSD into his after-dinner drink. It's supposed to be a harmless prank, a way to see how he reacts. Olson doesn't react well. He becomes paranoid, convinced that people are trying to kill him. A week later, he crashes through the window of his 10th-floor hotel room in New York City and falls to his death. The official story is suicide. But decades later, when his body is exhumed, forensic evidence suggests he may have been struck on the head before going through the window. The CIA denies any wrongdoing. Documents are destroyed. In 1973, when MKUltra is about to be exposed, CIA Director Richard Helms orders all files related to the program destroyed. But some survive, hidden in financial records building that the destruction order missed. What survives reveals a program of staggering scope. At least 80 institutions are involved. Universities, hospitals, prisons, pharmaceutical companies. At least 185 researchers participate. Thousands of people are experimented on, most without their knowledge or consent. The experiments include sleep deprivation, isolation, sexual humiliation, physical torture. Prisoners are promised reduced sentences if they volunteer, then subjected to brutal procedures. Drug addicts are given heroin in exchange for submitting to experiments. The vulnerable, the marginalized, the powerless become raw material for the CIA's research. And what does all this suffering achieve? The perfect truth serum is never found. Mind control remains science fiction. The only thing MKUltra proves is how far a government will go when it operates without oversight, without accountability, without basic human decency. Radiation and biological warfare. The Vanderbilt University Hospital in Nashville, Tennessee. The year is 1945. Poor pregnant women, mostly African American, come to the clinic for prenatal care. They're offered free vitamins to ensure healthy babies. What they're not told is that these vitamins contain radioactive iron. The researchers want to study how radiation moves through the body. The women and their unborn children are the test subjects. Years later, some of these children will develop cancer. The researchers never follow up to see the long-term effects. The women never learn what was done to them. At the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, researchers feed radioactive oatmeal to mentally disabled children at the Fernald School. The boys, many of them abandoned by their families, are told they're joining a special science club. They're excited to be chosen, to feel special for once. They have no idea they're being used in radiation experiments. In hospitals across America, similar experiments are conducted. Cancer patients are injected with plutonium without their knowledge or consent. The researchers select patients who are poor, uneducated, or terminally ill, people they believe can't fight back. Eb Cade, an African-American construction worker, is one of these victims. In 1945, after a car accident leaves him with broken bones, he's taken to a hospital in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Instead of treating his injuries, doctors inject him with plutonium, then monitor how his body processes the radioactive material. They extract 15 of his teeth to study plutonium uptake in bones. They never tell him what they've done. When Eb finally escapes from the hospital and refuses to return, the researchers are furious, not because they're concerned about his health, but because they've lost their test subject. The experiments aren't limited to individuals. Entire communities become testing grounds for biological warfare research. In 1950, the U.S. Navy conducts Operation Sea Spray. Ships positioned off the coast of San Francisco spray massive clouds of bacteria over the city. The bacteria, Serratia marcescens and Bacillus globigii, are supposed to be harmless. The military wants to see how a biological attack would spread through an urban environment. Within days, 11 people check into Stanford Hospital with severe urinary tract infections. One of them, Edward Nevin, dies. The bacteria sprayed over the city has infected his heart. The Navy never acknowledges responsibility. The experiments continue. In Minneapolis, the Army sprays zinc cadmium sulfide over poor neighborhoods to simulate biological warfare clouds. In St. Louis, they target the Pruitt-Igoe housing complex, home to thousands of low-income African-American families. Children playing outside are covered in the fine powder. Decades later, researchers will discover that the compound used may have been contaminated with radioactive particles. New York City's subway system becomes another testing ground. In 1966, Army scientists dropped light bulbs filled with bacteria onto the tracks at stations in Midtown Manhattan. As trains rushed through the tunnels, they spread the bacteria throughout the system. Millions of commuters are exposed. The Army considers the test a success. They never inform the public. These aren't rogue operations. These experiments are approved, funded, and monitored by government agencies. The Atomic Energy Commission, the Department of Defense, the Public Health Service, all participate in or oversee human radiation experiments. When questioned, researchers defend their actions. They claim the radiation doses were too small to cause harm. They insist the biological agents were harmless simulants. They argue that the research was necessary for national security. But the victims tell a different story. Children develop thyroid cancer. Women suffer miscarriages. Communities near nuclear facilities experience unusually high rates of leukemia and other cancers. And when these people try to seek answers, they're met with denial, secrecy, and legal barriers. The government classifies the documents. They invoke national security to avoid accountability. They wait for the victims to die, knowing that dead people can't testify. But some records survive. In the 1990s, President Clinton's Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments uncovers thousands of cases. The report reveals a pattern of exploitation, targeting the vulnerable, concealing the truth, destroying evidence. The committee issues recommendations for compensation and oversight. Some victims receive settlements, but many die before seeing justice, and countless others never even knew they were experimented on. Thank you so much for staying with us until this point. Your commitment to understanding these difficult truths means everything. And believe me, the most shocking revelations are still ahead. The Soviet machine. Behind the Iron Curtain, Soviet scientists are conducting their own brutal experiments, hidden from the world in a vast network of secret facilities. The Soviets have one advantage over their American counterparts. They operate in a totalitarian state, where dissent means death, where entire categories of people can disappear without anyone asking questions. The Gulag system provides an endless supply of test subjects. Political prisoners, religious dissidents, ethnic minorities deemed enemies of the state, all become raw material for Soviet science. In the permafrost of Siberia, in windowless basements beneath Moscow, in psychiatric hospitals that are really prisons, the experiments begin. At Laboratory 1, also known as the Poison Laboratory, Soviet scientists work to develop untraceable poisons. The facility is run by the NKVD, later the KGB, and its mission is simple: create substances that can eliminate enemies of the state without leaving evidence. The scientists need to test their creations. They select prisoners from the gulags, people already sentenced to death. These victims are brought to the laboratory, given food or drink laced with experimental poisons, then monitored as they die. The deaths are slow and documented in meticulous detail. Ricin, digitoxin, mustard gas, radioactive thallium, all are tested on living human beings. One scientist, Grigory Marinovsky, becomes particularly skilled at this work. He personally poisons dozens of prisoners, taking notes on progression of symptoms, the time until death, the victim's final moments. He's looking for the perfect poison. Fast-acting, impossible to detect, with symptoms that mimic natural death. When Stalin dies in 1953, some historians suspect he may have been poisoned with warfarin, a blood thinner, by his own security chief. The irony is brutal. The dictator who authorized so many poison experiments may have become a victim of the very program he created. But poisons are just one area of Soviet research. The study of mind control fascinates Soviet scientists as much as it does their American counterparts. At the Serbsky Institute in Moscow, psychiatry becomes a weapon of political repression. Dissidents who challenge the Communist Party are declared mentally ill. After all, the Soviet logic goes, anyone who opposes a perfect socialist state must be insane. These political prisoners are confined to psychiatric hospitals where they're subjected to treatments designed to break their will. They're given massive doses of psychotropic drugs that cause seizures, loss of motor control, and permanent brain damage. They're placed in isolation cells where they're deprived of sleep, subjected to constant noise, and psychologically tortured until they recant their beliefs or lose their minds entirely. Natalia Gorbanevskaya, a poet who protested the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia, spends years in a psychiatric prison. She's forcibly injected with drugs that leave her unable to think clearly, unable to write, unable to be herself. When she's finally released, she's a shadow of who she was. The Soviets also experiment with sensory deprivation and isolation. At secret facilities in the Ural Mountains, test subjects are placed in soundproof chambers for weeks or months. Some emerge with permanent psychological damage, unable to distinguish reality from hallucination. Soviet scientists are particularly interested in creating super soldiers, enhanced humans who can endure extreme conditions and follow orders without question. At military research facilities, soldiers are subjected to brutal conditioning programs. They're deprived of sleep for days, forced to perform grueling physical tasks, exposed to psychological manipulation designed to eliminate individual thought. Some of these experiments involve attempts to enhance physical performance through surgery and drugs. There are unconfirmed reports of attempts to transplant organs from animals to humans, to test experimental stimulants that could keep soldiers fighting for days without rest. The Soviet biological warfare program rivals anything in the West. At facilities like Vector in Siberia, scientists work with the world's deadliest pathogens: anthrax, smallpox, plague, Marburg virus. They're developing weapons that could kill millions. To test these weapons, the Soviets conduct open-air experiments. In 1979, a leak at a military facility in Sverdlovsk releases weaponized anthrax into the air. At least 66 people die horrible deaths as their lungs fill with bacteria. The Soviet government claims it was an outbreak caused by contaminated meat. The truth doesn't emerge until after the fall of the Soviet Union. On Vozrozhdenia Island in the Aral Sea, the Soviets test biological weapons in the open. The island becomes so contaminated that it's abandoned, left as a toxic waste site filled with buried anthrax and other deadly pathogens that persist in the soil to this day. Throughout all these experiments, one principle remains constant. Human life is expendable in service of the state. The individual means nothing. The collective, as defined by the Communist Party, is everything. And when the Soviet Union finally collapses in 1991, the true scope of these programs begins to emerge. Scientists defect to the West, bringing horror stories and documentation. Archives are opened, revealing decades of abuse. But many secrets remain buried. Many perpetrators are never held accountable. Many victims are never identified. The aftermath and hidden truth. December 1974. The New York Times publishes a bombshell article by investigative journalist Seymour Hersh. The headline reads, "Huge CIA operation reported in U.S. against anti-war forces, other dissidents in Nixon years." The article reveals illegal domestic surveillance, but also hints at something darker. Secret CIA mind control experiments. The revelation forces the government's hand. Senator Frank Church leads an investigation. The Church Committee, as it becomes known, holds public hearings that expose the extent of CIA abuses. Americans watch in horror as details of MKUltra and other programs are revealed. But there's a problem. CIA Director Richard Helms has already destroyed most of the MKUltra files. Only a fraction of the evidence survives. The full truth of what was done, to whom and why, is lost forever. Some victims come forward, demanding answers. Many of them have spent years believing they were going insane, not knowing they were drugged, experimented on, deliberately traumatized by their own government. Velma Orlikow was one of Dr. Ewan Cameron's patients in Montreal. She went to him for help with postpartum depression. Cameron subjected her to months of experimental treatment, drug-induced comas, massive electroshocks, recorded messages played thousands of times. When she emerged, she couldn't remember her children's names. Her marriage nearly collapsed. Her life was destroyed. It takes Velma decades to learn the truth. That the CIA funded her treatment as part of MKUltra, that she was a test subject in experiments designed to erase and rebuild human minds. When she finally gets answers, she's 70 years old. Most of her life has been stolen from her. She sues the CIA. After years of legal battles, she receives a settlement of $100,000. It's an insult, a pittance compared to what was taken from her. But it's more than most victims ever get. Many victims never receive any acknowledgement at all. The prostitutes used in Operation Midnight Climax remain anonymous. The sailors exposed the chemical weapons at Edgewood Arsenal fight for decades to get their medical records, to prove what was done to them. Many die before their cases are resolved. The federal government eventually admits wrongdoing, sort of. President Clinton apologizes for the radiation experiments in 1995. The government establishes compensation programs for some victims. But the requirements are strict, the evidence standards high, and many legitimate claims are denied. What about the scientists who conducted these experiments? Most face no consequences. Sidney Gottlieb, the architect of MKUltra, retires to his farm in Virginia, where he raises goats and tends his garden. He dies peacefully in 1999, never charged with a crime. Ewan Cameron returns to Scotland and dies in 1967, his reputation intact in psychiatric circles. The Nazi scientists brought over an Operation Paperclip receive even better treatment. Werner von Braun, who used slave labor to build V-2 rockets, becomes a hero of the American space program. Kurt Blome, who experimented with plague bacteria on concentration camp prisoners, works for the U.S. military developing biological weapons. They die as respected members of society, their war crimes forgotten or forgiven. And the experiments themselves, did they stop? That's the question that haunts researchers and activists to this day. Officially, yes, new regulations are implemented. Institutional review boards are established to oversee human research. Informed consent becomes mandatory. The Nuremberg Code, the Declaration of Helsinki, federal regulations, all now protect human subjects. But questions remain. Documents continue to be classified. Programs operate in secret. Technologies become more sophisticated. In the 1980s, reports emerged of continued military experiments with psychoactive drugs and non-lethal weapons. In the 2000s, the CIA admits to using enhanced interrogation techniques on terrorism suspects, techniques that include sensory deprivation, stress positions, and waterboarding, many similar to methods tested during MKUltra. Are new experiments happening now? We don't know. By definition, if they're secret, we can't know. But history teaches us that when governments operate without oversight, when they believe national security justifies any means, the potential for abuse is enormous. The legacy of Cold War human experiments persists in other ways. It's damaged public trust in government and medical institutions, particularly in minority communities that were disproportionately targeted. It's made people suspicious of public health initiatives, wondering if they're being told the whole truth. This legacy is also a warning. It shows what happens when ethics are abandoned in pursuit of scientific knowledge or military advantage. It demonstrates that ordinary people, scientists and doctors and government officials, can commit extraordinary evils when they convince themselves the cause is just. The victims of these experiments deserve better. They deserve to be treated as human beings, not as expendable resources. They deserve truth, not deception. They deserve justice, not cover-ups. Some fought for accountability and won small victories. Others died without ever knowing what was done to them. All of them, known and unknown, are reminders of the price we pay when we forget that some lines must never be crossed, no matter the cost. The Cold War is over. The Berlin Wall has fallen. The Soviet Union has collapsed. But the secrets from that era still linger, buried in classified files, hidden in memories too painful to speak, waiting for the moment when the full truth finally emerges. If it ever does, the experiments we've explored today represent one of the darkest chapters in modern history. Thousands of innocent people became victims of programs that violated every ethical principle, every standard of human decency. But these aren't just stories from the past. They're warnings for the present and future. They remind us to question authority, to demand transparency, to protect the vulnerable, and to never assume that governments or institutions will always act in our best interest. We think, can any government be trusted with unlimited power in the name of national security? Do you believe these types of experiments have truly ended, or have they simply evolved into forms we haven't yet discovered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters, and these conversations are essential. If this video opened your eyes to truths you didn't know, please subscribe to this channel. We're committed to bringing you more documented history that challenges the official narratives and reveals what really happened behind closed doors. And don't stop here. Click on the next recommended video to discover the CIA's secret wars in Latin America, another shocking chapter of covert operations that shaped our world. The truth is waiting for you. Thank you for watching, for caring about these difficult truths, and for being part of a community that refuses to forget.